our VP? Okay. Just in case, I have her remarks here, so then I can do it, or we turn it around and let Randy talk first. Let me see. It's 2:02. John Shea, Owen, Tina Chung. Oh, Tina's here. Yeah. Sume.
Hi.
Is that Sume? And I see Nancy from.
Hi everyone.
Yeah, it's me.
Nancy from Ohio.
Yes, Columbus, Ohio.
Right. Everybody follow the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict just now?
Yes, acquitted.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so now, Annie, since Randy is a friend, a close friend of ours, and a little bit more, and we can be a little bit more informal. So, what I like to do is just switch the introduction and Randy's remarks around, if that's okay with Randy, and then we can ask Annie when she gets in to introduce Randy after Randy's presentation. But I can also introduce her, but introduce Randy. But let's just go ahead and let Randy give a warm welcome, virtual welcome for Randy Schreiber. And he is, as we all know, longtime friend of Taiwan and of the people of Taiwan. And more details in Annie's presentation, but let's give him a warm hand, and then I think we just go ahead and start the program.
Great, thank you.
Oh, Annie's here. Oh,
sorry, I was having a lot of technology issues.
Oh, okay, no, yeah, change of plans. Go ahead, Annie, and introduce Randy, and then we start with Randy's remarks. But a couple of minutes introduction by our Vice President Annie Xiao in Oregon. Go ahead, Annie.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. And my apologies, I was having a lot of computer issues signing on, and it took quite some time. But Fta family and friends, good afternoon, everyone. I am Annie Xiao, Fta Vice President. Our Fta President Ming Zichen sends his regards as he's currently in Taiwan dreaming of sweet dreams at 2 o'clock in the morning. However, it's an honor and pleasure for me to introduce Randall G Schreiber to you today. Everyone, please warm applause.
Virtual and real.
Virtual applause.
But warm, as long as it's warm.
Randy has been a longtime friend of Fta. He has attended many of our events and workshops over the years, and we're always impressed by his knowledge and willingness to speak openly and freely to us about all things U.S.-Taiwan relations. He's done magnificent work as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs until December of last year. For instance, in the Pentagon reports, he referred to Taiwan groundbreakingly as a country. And we truly need more bold Taiwan supporters such as Randy in the Pentagon. He co-founded the Project 2049 Institute in 2008, a nonprofit research organization focused on promoting American values and security interests in the Indo-Pacific region, and particularly as it relates to Taiwan and China. And at the Project 2049 Institute, he previously served as CEO and president and is currently the chairman of the board. From 2001 and 2003, he served as the chief of staff and senior policy advisor to the Deputy Secretary of State. From 94 to 98, he worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, including as the senior official responsible for day-to-day management of U.S. bilateral relations with People's Liberation Army and the bilateral security and military relationships with Taiwan. He has been such a vocal and avid supporter of Taiwan and a strong critic of the Chinese government. And it goes without saying that we are grateful for your support. Mr. Schriver has won numerous military and civilian awards. In 2005, Randy was awarded the prestigious Order of the Brilliant Star with Violet Grand Cordon by then Taiwan President Chen Shui-bian for his service promoting U.S.-Taiwan relations. Additionally, Schriver has been awarded the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service, the highest civilian award presented by U.S. Secretary of Defense. All tremendous, impressive accomplishments and honors. So without further ado, please join me with a warm welcome and applause in welcoming the Honorable Randall G Schreiber.
Yay. I wish you
Right.
had worn the Order of the Brilliant Star today, Randy.
It might be around here somewhere. I'm in
All
my
right,
office.
next time.
But, I'll have to think of it next time. And I'm speaking with you from Arlington, Virginia. I wish I was in Oregon. I was there in August. But I'm an Oregon almost native. I was born in Hawaii, but mostly raised in Oregon. So nice to be talking to a fellow Oregonian. And the comment about referring to Taiwan as a country, I'll have to circle back to that in Q&A because there's a bit of a funny story about that. But what I want to do is set some background and context for the remarks I want to make. So tensions are running high in the Taiwan Strait, and this is largely a result of threatening rhetoric, provocative PLA activities. The CCP leadership claims that Taiwan is moving towards independence, and the basis for dialogue has been destroyed by Taiwan's political activities, and much of that suspicion is directed at the president personally, whom Beijing claims supports de jure independence. However, U.S. support remains strong, particularly through arms sales, U.S. having approved major programs, for example, F-16 fighters just 3 years ago. U.S.-China mill-to-mill relations are stalled, though there are attempts to revive them. And in the U.S., despite transitioning from a Republican administration to a Democrat, there's largely policy continuity. Our policy now benefits from experienced and steady hands, such as the likes of Jim Moriarty, Kurt Campbell, his energy, his entrepreneurship. And in the region, we have new interest in Taiwan, including a Japanese prime minister who is willing to speak more publicly about the U.S.-Japan alliance and the importance of Taiwan in that context. To continue to set the stage, I'm a baseball fan. We just had a great World Series, and baseball, after a year of empty stadiums, is now back fully in swing. Now, if you think I just level set us for current day 2021, you'd be wrong. I just described for you the situation in 1995. And that includes, you can test me on any of that. That includes the baseball. Remember, 1994 was the strike year. Includes the F-16s. Remember the sale in 92, 93, before 95. Probably if I had continued, I would have given it away eventually. If I would have said the best film, the Oscar-winning film, was Forrest Gump, or that Hootie and the Blowfish had 2 songs in the top 10. Derek Jeter played his first game in uniform for the Yankees. So eventually you probably would have caught on. But I take this stroll down memory lane not just to be nostalgic, although 95 is a bit of a nostalgic year for me personally as well. It was my first year in the office of the Secretary of Defense working on Taiwan issues, and I personally made my first visit to Taiwan in 1995. And I don't share these historical parallels to try to tell everyone, don't worry, everything will be fine, we'll all get through these difficulties and these troubles. So why do I start with 1995? Well, let me tell you a few more facts about that era before I talk about current day. At the strategic level, Taiwan was not yet a full democracy. The first direct presidential election, of course, took place in March 1996. The U.S. and China were building toward a constructive strategic partnership. The strategy document from the Defense Department at the time in 1995 stated that our major objective in Asia was to engage China and support its constructive integration into the international community and contribute to maintaining peace in the Taiwan Strait. In 1995, at the practical level, our ties were strong but pretty stilted. At AIT Taipei, we had no active duty military officers serving there. Our foreign service officers had to fake retire. Cohen and others would probably remember that. Our foreign service officers had to actually put in retirement papers with the State Department to go out and serve in Taipei and then come back and get rehired. We didn't even fly the flag, the American flag, at AIT Taipei in 1995. Our military relationship, which was strong, was still very limited and mostly was characterized by foreign military sales and arms talks, and the level of visits were kept at a very modest level, colonel, 06 captain, or below. And even in the arms sales domain, much remained taboo. We didn't even consider selling submarines at that time. So those are some other facts about 1995. Why do I start there? Because in light of that pressure that China was putting on Taiwan as Taiwan was going through political reform and heading towards its first direct election, the US and Taiwan adapted, we evolved, and we improved. And we did so out of necessity because of our shared values that drive us together, and as partners, our shared interest in problem solving. So from 1995 until today, we now find that Taiwan is a model democracy. And it's our 10th, maybe this year, our 9th largest trading partner in the world, and a like-minded partner in so many ways. The strategy document that I oversaw at the Defense Department states that the United States has a vital interest in upholding the rules-based international order, which includes a strong, prosperous, and democratic Taiwan. The United States is pursuing a strong partnership with Taiwan and will faithfully implement the Taiwan Relations Act as part of the broader commitment to the security and stability of the Indo-Pacific. Taiwan has now developed a strategy for deterrence by denial, which sets realistic objectives and outlines achievable lines of effort. And Taiwan's defense budget has grown substantially over the last 2 years in line with USG requests. China is now our named priority, a strategic competitor, and the pacing element for our military modernization. The US and Taiwan have a series of dialogues that are very robust, like the Monterey military talks, the special channel, and we routinely send flag officers to Taiwan and occasionally even make that public. Our AIT is fully staffed with foreign service officers, and our AIT is also serviced by active duty military, including a Marine Security Guard detachment, which guards our new facility, which does proudly fly the American flag. So much has changed since '95 for the better, but each of these incremental steps took people willing to take the initiative and to make the bureaucracy move and also be willing to bear some risk. Of course, we also have to acknowledge that the PLA and the PRC have also evolved. After decades of investment with a Taiwan contingency as the core driver of its modernization efforts, the PLA has seen many of its enhanced capabilities come online. Now, arguably, it's the same CCP as it's always been, but given their growing power and influence, they've been willing to cast aside their so-called hide and bide approach and are now more willing to be aggressive and accept greater risk. So this is really, as we used to say in my neighborhood, here's the rub. We are adapting, evolving, improving, but are we doing so quickly enough, given what's happening on the other side of the strait? As the American humorist Will Rogers once said, even if you're on the right track, you can still get run over if you're not going fast enough. So I think we are in a much better place, even though the adversary is stronger, is willing to accept risk at greater levels, and is pushing Taiwan into a corner as best it can. But we have greater international support, greater recognition for Taiwan as important in the global supply chain, as a security partner, as a contributor to regional and global citizenship. So my message is we need to think about, even if we're on that right track, are we going fast enough? We need some sense of urgency to continue with a very positive agenda. So let me just say a few things that I think are very important. I think this discussion about strategic clarity versus strategic ambiguity is interesting, but I think it misses the point a little bit. I'm grateful that people like Richard Haass have introduced the notion of strategic clarity, and now the importance of Taiwan is being discussed in elite circles, and it's now faddish among the cognoscente. But in fact, it's a little bit misleading to say this is a binary choice between clarity or ambiguity. The fact is, we've been more and more clear over time about the importance of Taiwan, and evidence by the two strategy reports that I quoted, 1995 versus today. And while I'd like to see even greater clarity still, declaratory policy at the strategic level is really only part of the story. Declaratory policy can be fragile, it can be ephemeral. We need really actions, and we need physical, concrete, demonstrable statements of support for Taiwan beyond declaratory policy. So I think I'd be happy if we moved in the direction of strategic clarity. But we need to also understand that it's the concrete actions and support that ultimately will be judged by, and Beijing will judge us as to whether or not we are serious. Now, I do give Taiwan credit for increasing defense spending, but I have always said, and therefore I have to be consistent, the dollar amount, the amount of budget is not always the right metric. It's what you spend on and how you invest and how you work to get better and improve. So again, right track, but let's think about as a partnership, war fighting, deterrence by denial, and how we can be most effective and use those investments in the best way. Now, you hear from time to time that the U.S. Wants to be more directive and wants to tell Taiwan how to spend its money. That would be a mistake in my view. But through a partnership that talks about realistic deterrence, we need to think about and advise, at least as a interested and important partner, how Taiwan should be making those investments. There are a lot of very affordable and practical solutions for Taiwan that would make Taiwan a much harder target. Now, I also think there's discussion about timelines. We now have the Davidson 6-year window. I worked very closely with Admiral Davidson. I've talked to him a number of times. I have no idea where 6 years comes from. It's such an odd number. It's not 5, it's not 10. It's the 6-year window. I suspect it comes from an assessment of PLA's capabilities and their investment profile and when they'll achieve certain milestones. And I think it's fine to say 6 years because I think that does light a fire and give us some urgency. But the truth of the matter is this is a very dynamic equation, and there are things that we can do to extend those timelines, and there are ways we can look at PLA vulnerabilities to make that a more difficult proposition for them. We know in our own military, when we invested and improved and got better, we created new vulnerabilities along the way. After the revolution of military affairs, people said, but you're over-reliant on space-based sensors and communications. More recently, in the Defense Department, people have remarked about the advancements in research and development and fielding advanced weapon systems. But what about your supply chain and the vulnerability of being able to sustain those given the complexity of your supply chain and the fact that some of that is heavily influenced by China? We need to pick the PLA apart in the exact same manner, and we need to think about, if not single points of failure, then catastrophic points of failure that are near single points of failure. And we need to understand how, as they improve, where are the new vulnerabilities growing for them, and how can Taiwan and the United States take advantage of that? I think I'm speaking a lot about the defense issues because I think this is on our minds given the flight activity, the fighters across the center line, the bombers going around the entire circumference of the island. But we also, of course, need to think about a more comprehensive relationship. I've long advocated for a FTA with Taiwan. If you follow U.S. politics at all, we don't do many bilateral free trade agreements anymore, and that seems to be the product of bipartisan agreement on trade these days in a negative direction. There's no constituency for trade liberalization on Capitol Hill. But we certainly need to use our tools that are available, such as the Trade and Framework Agreement, in order to strengthen our trade relationship and take advantage of where there are complementary capabilities in our commercial sector, and continue to do the things that tie us together, like TSMC's plan to make such a major investment in Arizona. And we certainly can't afford to take steps in the backward direction. And I must confess, I'm a little worried about the proposed referendum on ractopamine, which I think would be a step back. President Tsai took a courageous, bold step. We recognized it as being courageous given the domestic politics in Taiwan. To step in the other direction through referendum or any other mechanism, I think would be very harmful for our trade relationship and for U.S.-Taiwan relations in general.
Randy, these are all questions that that were coming your way.
So you want me to
So
wrap
I
up
think
then?
you already covered 3 questions, I think.
So
Yeah,
you
do you
want me to
mind?
wrap
Or
up is what you're saying?
yeah, it was brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop.
No, I don't. Yeah, thank you, Randy. Brilliant. As brilliant as the Order of the Brilliant Star.
All right.
Thank you, guys. Everybody, big applause for Randy, and again, always his willingness to just speak freely. Yeah, and about strategic clarity, of course, that was also something that a couple of our people came over with talking about. But it seems to me that we almost have strategic clarity, and that's definitely the most strategic clarity I've seen since I started with FAPA in 1989, stopping short of the administration saying, and this is what we call strategic clarity, enunciating these two words. But I think we're there already.
That was my point, that we're trying to, in this debate, talk about a binary choice. We're either strategic clarity or strategic ambiguity. But the fact is, we've been becoming more and more clear over time about the importance of Taiwan, our willingness to publicly articulate the importance of Taiwan. And look, Kurt Campbell in 1996 said our policy should be strategic clarity, tactical ambiguity. There's always going to be some amount of ambiguity in terms of what will the U.S. do if Taiwan faces a military attack or military coercion, because we still have a Congress, we still have a consultative process. There's no way you can commit, 100% to a particular course before a contingency is upon you. In fact, even our treaty allies, many of them have consultative mechanisms and are not the rock solid, we will be there to fight for you no matter what kinds of arrangements. So I think we are moving in a much clearer direction, and I'm happy about that.
And I use often your interview with Tony Abbott, the Australian former Prime Minister from last month, where you ask him about Australia's commitment to coming to Taiwan's defense. And he said, no, we have a treaty with the United States. And if the United States gets into a kerfuffle somewhere, then we'll be there. So, it was great that you did that.
And he's a former prime minister, but remember, the current defense minister just 2 weeks ago said it would be inconceivable for Australia not to be there with the United States.
Right. Yeah. So we have Japan, the United States, Australia, all lining up. So yes, Randy, thank you. I told Randy already that we got 30 questions, the most we've ever received for any event. Was some overlap, so I whittled it down to about 15, 16 questions. Some we already covered. But let's go ahead and get the first one on the screen, Chiyun, and that's from Mark Kao, president of FAPR. And I'll read them. Can you read them, Randy, yourself? Or
it's not up
or
yet.
along?
Oh, here it is.
Yeah. Can you read along? Or I'll read them to the audience. But so any recommendations regarding Kemoya Matsu? How would Taiwan defend these islands? Should Taiwan give them back to China in exchange for Taiwan independence? Very provocative question from Mark, the former FAPA president and current FAPR president.
Well, that's an interesting last part of that question. Should they be given back in China in exchange for independence? Because you don't hear many people talk about a negotiated independence. And I suppose it's because people in Taiwan believe they're already independent, and President Tsai has said as much. But presumably, if you get to the negotiating table with the PRC again, there should be some path where Taiwan says, let's make a deal and you recognize our independence, and there should be things that can be put on the table. I know my old friend Ku Kwang-ming says he'd love to negotiate independence, and he's got a whole construct of big brother, little brother, and he said we can tell the Chinese we'll never join a military alliance against them, we'll never vote against them in the UN. So he's actually got a plan for how we can convince the
Negotiate.
PRC.
Yeah.
But look, militarily, it's a very hard target, and Taiwan has done a lot to demilitarize the offshore islands. So militarily, it would be very difficult to defend, and given the proximity to mainland China. And I happen to think, other than gaining probably the best galleon in Taiwan, they don't gain a lot more than that by taking the offshore islands, because I think it would be a tactical victory and a strategic blunder. They really wouldn't be any better off in terms of posing a threat to the main island of Taiwan, even Penghu for that matter. And surely there'd be backlash, international condemnation, further sanction. So I don't know that it's a huge gain for the PRC, and I think it would on net work against them in terms of the blowback and reaction. I suppose Xi Jinping is going to face some pressure toward the next party Congress to look large and in charge and all that, and maybe flexing his muscles that way is something they're considering. But on balance, I don't think it's, I don't make it a habit to speak for Zhongnanhai or Beijing, but on balance, I don't think it's a good move for them.
Yeah. And then so the second part of the question, if the PLA invades these disputed islands like the Spratlys or Itu Aba, will the US send troops to Taiwan to stop the CCP's invasion and recognize Taiwan as a country? Similar question.
If I were in government, I would say that's a hypothetical I'm going to punt on, but I'm not in government.
Right.
Yeah, we go through this exercise with the Japanese and recently with the Philippines when it comes to disputed territories that we don't recognize their sovereign claim over because it's in dispute, but the treaty still applies. So in the East China Sea, the Senkaku Islands, Diaoyu or Diaoyutai Islands, we do not recognize Japan's sovereignty over the Senkaku Islands, but we do say Article 5 of the treaty applies because they are territories administered by Japan. In the case of the Philippines, we say that the treaty does not apply to the disputed territories, but it applies to Filipino armed personnel, Filipino military assets and platforms such as ships, etc. And so it's almost inconceivable that there would be a dispute over a Philippine claimed island with China that did involve Filipino personnel in the armed forces or the Coast Guard. So we basically, with Secretary Pompeo, extended the Mutual Defense Treaty to say it would likely cover these kinds of disputes because Philippine forces would be involved. So this is a long way of saying it is not an obligation of the United States to come to Taiwan or anyone else's defense where disputed territories are concerned. But I believe we would treat it like we would treat any other threat against Taiwan, and that the Taiwan Relations Act says that these are such a move would be of grave concern to the United States, and there'd be a consultative process with Congress to determine appropriate action.
Next question is from Tina. I think she's also here from the VOA. As Xi Jinping warned the US not to play with fire on the Taiwan issue, the US and Taiwan also held high-level political military talks this week. Can you, Randy, give us a sense of what the talks' role is or are in both US-Taiwan relations and in the larger context of the security picture in the Indo-Pacific region, now that US allies such as Japan and Australia seem to be aligning with the US on the issue of peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait? And maybe just your impression, not too long, Randy, if it's okay with you.
Not too long. Okay. I think
It's
I
a
think
broad
it's
question,
incredibly inappropriate for Xi Jinping to be threatening his counterpart in the United States, and that when President Biden reiterated the policy, which was a simple restatement of longstanding policy, to be threatened in return, I think is very inappropriate. In terms of the military and security discussions in the Indo-Pacific Command, I don't have any particular insight, but I do know that Indo-Pacific Command itself is looking at the Taiwan scenario contingency in much more detailed, serious ways, and that our own operational plans, are evolving consistent with how China is changing and improving, and how we would expect them to fight. So my presumption is there is some consultative process between Taiwan and the United States. How does the ODC in Taiwan align with how our op plans are starting to evolve themselves?
Thank you, Randy. Thank you. And Tina, you're here, right? So next question. This is something that I'm always very interested in, and we already coordinate a bit with Project 2049 a couple of years ago about seeing if this is feasible. But inviting Joseph Wu to Capitol Hill, and so the Taiwan Travel Act was signed into law in March 2018, lifted all restrictions on high-level visits from and to Taiwan, including the president. We have seen some trips, Alex Azar last year. We think it's time for the House and the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee to hear directly from Taiwan's foreign minister about the best ever US relationship we currently have with Taiwan. And with China's ongoing bullying of Taiwan, poaching allies, continued harassment, ADIZ, we need to hear directly from Taiwan's foreign minister. So we hope that the State Department will sign off on a visit by Taiwan's foreign minister, Joseph Wu, to come before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, even virtual. Remember, Randy, that we talked about that maybe 2 years ago at some, with Ian and about inviting him to a think tank event, even. And I think you. So, how do you feel about this?
I think it would be important to hear directly from the foreign minister, and he's somebody who's very well known in Washington. He's somebody who is key to the decision making at the highest levels in Taiwan. We should be eager to have as much contact as possible. I think virtual is fine, in person is fine. We shouldn't allow anybody, particularly Beijing, to tell us who and who is not welcome in our capital.
Yeah, great. And yeah, virtual, of course, is a step up. Even he will be in the Capitol or in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, but he's also not there. So it will be tough for the Chinese to complain about it, just like Tsai Ing-wen did in Denmark twice in the past 3 years, I think. Next question.
We've had think tank events with Chen Shui-bian virtual. We've had Ma Ying-jeou, and so it's not a huge departure from past practice.
Right. The next question to you, and that's the referendum on pork, indeed. So I think you already pretty much answered that, but what's your perspective regarding the referendum of opposing the import of US pork? What will be the impact of the referendum on the current excellent US-Taiwan relationship?
Well, I suppose it depends on the outcome, but I'm a bit disappointed it's even being put forward on a referendum. This is old business. We should be able to move on and pocket the progress that Tsai Ing-wen delivered when she made the decision. It was a courageous decision. I'd like to see the U.S. reciprocate in terms of a trade deal or something that is of interest to Tsai Ing-wen, but I do worry about the impact of a step back here.
Yeah. And the next, were you there, Randy, when Rick Ruzicka said that a FTA between Taiwan and the United States is not even possible because they don't have diplomatic relations, and it would be an arrangement between AIT and TECRO. That's the way I understood that. I should ask Rick Ruzicka from a former AIT staff about that. But he said bluntly, I think, say legally it's impossible to have an FTA between Taiwan and the United States.
Well, Rick is a friend, and I respect his views. But look, all of this is basically made up. These are invented constructs by the U.S. government,
right?
And
where there
they
is a
can be
will, there's
changed
a
and
way.
undone.
Yeah, where there's a will, there's a way, right?
I mean, if the mirror image is what are the kinds of things we did with the PRC when we had official relations with the ROC and unofficial relations with the PRC, we signed plenty of agreements in the lead up to the 79 recognition with the PRC. We hosted leaders, and President Ford visited China when we had an unofficial, non-diplomatic relationship with them.
Right, yeah, right. Excellent points, yes. Two questions. You already touched upon deterrence, and there's two questions about deterrence. The first one's from Jenny, who is our former intern, who goes to Columbia at the moment in New York. And we often talk about military deterrence against the Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Has the United States considered deterrence by non-military means? For instance, intense economic sanctions. How can Taiwan play a part in a non-military deterrence?
Well, absolutely. It's, deterrence is a psychological phenomena. It's getting into the mind of somebody else and what are the things you need to do to persuade them not to take this aggressive action that they might otherwise be willing to take. The whole military equation is a big part of it, particularly if you can prove deterrence by denial. If you can say you cannot succeed, that's a big piece of it. But the rest of it is really some equation of cost imposition. Now, that can be military too, but it can also be other means. And I do give the Biden administration credit when they talk about integrated deterrence. They're talking about other agencies, other levers that can be pulled. And so economic sanctions should be a part of it. Other further isolation should be part of it. We should understand. Let me put it more bluntly. We should understand what Xi Jinping values most, what he fears most, and we should be able to hold that at risk in the case of a worst case scenario and say, you don't want to bear these costs should you move against Taiwan. And it's not just military.
Wow, yeah. And the second question from Tina, also about deterrence. There are some scholars who said that to achieve dual deterrence, the Biden administration should not only give a clear signal of supporting Taiwan's defense, but also give Beijing the strategic reassurance of not supporting or even opposing Taiwan independence. What do you think about this?
I'm uncomfortable with that idea because, look, opposing military action is opposing aggression, opposing use of military force that could result in death and destruction. Opposing independence could put yourself in a position where you are opposing a decision arrived at through democratic means and through what the free people of Taiwan want. I was always more comfortable with the previous construct of we don't support Taiwan independence. I mean, that's passive. That's saying we're not going out and advocating for it or pushing it. But should the Taiwan people decide to go that route, we're not a disinterested party or an uninterested party, but we can accommodate the decisions of the people of Taiwan as needed. But we shouldn't be out front opposing it, in my opinion.
Remember, Randy, a long time ago, when Jesse Helms was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, there was an op-ed piece in the Washington Post, and it said, yeah, the United States supports self-determination for the people of Taiwan, but not if it leads to independence. And Jesse Helms, Jim Doran at the time, wrote, I think, a letter to the editor in the Washington Post saying, how can we as a revolutionary nation ourselves oppose any outcome to the process of self-determination? And I think with the whole U.S. support for self-determination, I think that also has made headways over the past 20 years into becoming much more voice of the people of Taiwan, should be heard, express consent. So I think we also, made really.
Well, Jesse Helms and Jim Dorn seems like yesterday. You said it was a long time ago, but you might also find a foreign affairs letter in 1998 where a young budding scholar at the time rebutted Chas Freeman's article and said the United States should be open to any outcome as long as it's arrived at peacefully, to include the sensitive issue of independence. Okay, I'll give you the spoiler. That was me in 1998.
Yeah. I just want to say, wow, that's fantastic. I'd like to
Yeah.
see that at some point. Can you still send that to me at some point?
Sure. It's
Yeah.
a foreign affairs letter rebutting the Chas Freeman article. But
Okay. Yeah, that was about. Was that about the L.A. could be nuclear attack? That thing was that or not? Or was that different Chess
I
Friedman
believe he
story?
did mention that in his
Yeah, that was
article,
that.
but that was
Right.
his
Right.
conversation with Xiong Guangkai, apparently.
Very interesting. Next one is from Angela, who is also here. I see Angela Yarbrough. Since the pandemic began, many countries, including the US, realized that a country should not rely on import-export with China for many reasons. Do you think that most countries, especially those accepting falling into China's One Belt, One Road initiative, are on track of becoming less dependent on trade with China? Or are people, do they have buyer's remorse? I think is what Angela's asking.
We
Are
got a
these
long way to
countries?
we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go in the United States. I think our goals have actually narrowed and become more limited. We just want to get the critical supply chains that are important to our national security or important to our well-being as a country for other reasons, such as pharmaceuticals, rare earths, whatever it might be. We just want to get them more secure and safe, not a complete decoupling of the relationship with China. Over time, maybe more decoupling can be achieved. But that's the United States. For heaven's sake, some of these other countries have really done nothing to diversify and improve their sense of security and well-being, in that China still holds so much leverage. And the Belt and Road, you have to disaggregate, look country by country. There's plenty of buyer's remorse out there, and in some instances, it manifests into people throwing the government out. I mean, that happened in a short period. It happened in Sri Lanka with the Rajapaksans. It happened in the Maldives. Um, it happened in Malaysia in a different form because of the corruption. Now it doesn't always stick. The Rajapaksans are back in Sri
Mhm.
Lanka, but I think these are the predatory economics don't generally do well when it comes to the domestic politics of the recipient country. So but we got a long way to go. And if I were just to focus on the United States, one of the lesser told stories is the fact that as we've applied tariffs, as we've looked at trying to diversify critical supply chains, nothing has been done to slow the flow of U.S. capital into China. And in fact, investment in China has only grown over the last few years. And so there's a disconnect here with our financial community and Wall Street, quite frankly. And because of China's military civil fusion, I think that has to be addressed.
Yeah. Thanks, Randy, and thanks, Angela, for the question. Next question. We have seen some continuation of Trump administration policies during the Biden administration, as well as bipartisan support of U.S. interests with regard to Taiwan increasing with public awareness. That being said, what advice would you give to the current administration, the Biden administration, to strengthen the United States deterrence strategy vis-a-vis
Probably
China?
deterrence.
Oh yeah, deterrence, right? Deterrence strategy. Yeah, that's right.
Different strategy. We could just all quit and go home, I guess.
Yes, yeah. We defer to Xi Jinping.
Yeah, look.
Yeah, deterrence strategy.
I think the Biden administration has a good team. I like Kurt Campbell and Eli Ratner and Dan Crittenbrink, I think there's a lot of continuity, not so much because it's a Republican view or a Democrat view, but because of what China's doing and how China's threatening the free and open order in the Indo-Pacific. So I think they're largely on the right track. I think the biggest key, well, a couple. We need to pay attention to the deterrence by denial strategy of Taiwan and help them resource it in the right ways. Taiwan needs to be prepared in a way that gives Beijing pause. But number two, we need to continue the work with partners and allies. I applaud this move of AUKUS. And Cohen, we were talking earlier about Australia's own evolution here. There's only one reason Australia would want nuclear submarines. Diesel submarines are perfectly fine for coastal defense of the coastal areas of Australia, particularly in that there's only a handful of population centers anyway. They want nuclear submarines because they want to be a contributor to peace and stability in the broader Indo-Pacific. We need to continue these minilateral, multilateral, whether that's the Quad with India, Japan, Australia, whether that's the AUKUS, whether that's ad hoc arrangements. The U.S. is more capable, more powerful than China, but as Jim Mattis used to say, he's never been on a crowded battlefield when it comes to allies and partners. We want Japan, we want Australia, we want India, we want the Philippines, we want South Korea, we want Vietnam, we want everybody to think about the China challenge and what they can bring to bear if we come to a point of crisis.
Excellent, thank you. And Howard's next in Boston, our chapter president in Massachusetts chapter. And given the current geopolitical realities in the region, wouldn't it be far more productive and a better deterrent to possible future Chinese aggression for the US to finally once and for all abandon the one China policy? In other words, is it time to throw the one China, the U.S. one China policy out?
Well, I'm sensitive to the work of diplomats, and even if they're fig leaf type arrangements, sometimes there's some utility in sustaining them. But I will say this: I think you could do a search and scan all the comments that I made as Assistant Secretary of Defense, and I don't think you'll find a single instance where I talked about a one China policy, because quite frankly, the things that it's founded on, it's not that it was, that I'm questioning the wisdom of our predecessors in government who made this decision in 78, 79. I might do so, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's that it was based on a fundamental policy of peaceful approaches from the PRC side. And they have violated every agreement in letter and in spirit when it comes to threatening Taiwan. So I see no obligation to continue to put forward this mantra as it's become less and less meaningful, because Beijing has shredded it with their use of intimidation and coercion and military tools. You look back on congressional testimony of all our officials at the time these communiques were signed, and time and again they say this is predicated on Beijing saying that they will pursue a fundamentally peaceful approach to the differences with Taiwan. They're not doing that. I don't see that we're obliged to continue to put forward a mantra that has become less meaningful because of Beijing's actions. So, I mean, do we then just scrap it completely? I don't know. I never really referred to it because Beijing had made a mockery out of it. I think, one particular course is to just continue to enhance and improve relations with Taiwan. So at some point, you'll look up and you'll say, to the untrained eye, this looks an awful lot like a normal diplomatic relationship, even though we haven't changed diplomatic relations.
Yeah, and so that FAPA's long-time ambition is to get rid of the 3 communiques in that whole cornerstone principle. We only want to see the TRA, the Taiwan Relations Act, and the 6 assurances as the cornerstone of. And then the good news is, of course, that that the 6 assurances were brought into the whole equation, but now we still want to get rid of the three communiques which harbor the vilified one China policy. And the good news is that the NDAA, last time I checked, that is supposed to go to the floor. The House version doesn't refer to the three communiques any longer. It's only TRA and six assurances. So hopefully that will survive.
I don't think you'll find a quote of me as an assistant secretary.
No, but even in the party platforms, and so it's gradually. I think it's fading. I hope to the extent because it's not an American thing. It's not a Taiwanese thing. It's Chinese love it. Americans don't. Anyway, quickly, I hope we can finish all these questions. But Taiwan policy review, as you remember, Randy, in 1994, the last Taiwan policy review was done. Chiyu, question 10. Thank you. The last Taiwan policy review was done, and the CCNAA, remember, Coordination Council for North American Affairs, was changed to TECRO. And 1994, Taiwan was about to become a full democracy. It is a full democracy today. So isn't it time to do another review almost 30 years later? Is this a good time for another Taiwan policy review?
Yeah, I guess we're all sort of prisoners of our own experiences and victims of our own experiences. Sometimes when you launch a formal review, you come out the other end not better off when you're in government. And the Biden administration just went through a North Korea policy review, and I have no idea what our policy is now. They have trouble articulating it. So there's policy reviews, capital letters, and there's policy reviews, small letters. And I guess I'm more inclined to say we should be reviewing and updating constantly. And I think that's what we did in the Trump administration. In the interest of time, I won't tick off everything we did, but I moved the Taiwan portfolio away from the China portfolio, gave it to the DASD, who handles alliances, Japan, Korea, Australia, Taiwan. We upped the level of visits. Flag officer visits are quite common now. So on and on and on. I want to be respectful of time, but I think just do these things as opportunities present, rather than launch a formal review, because sometimes you might not come out the other side where you want.
Yeah, right. So just keep moving forward instead of just say with a big splash, say, and now we have this. Question 11. Yeah, this is also one of the major ambitions of FAPA members, of course. That's about U.S.-Taiwan diplomatic relations. And yeah, that is a long shot, but it's still something that, we continue to remind members of Congress of with introducing legislation every Congress. And, so the Taipei Act, the Taiwan Allies International Protection and Enhancement Initiative, became law last year, 1.5 years ago. It requires the State Department to induce governments which are allies of Taiwan to maintain diplomatic ties with Taiwan and identify those at risk of severing relations. And what annoys us always is a bit that we the United States tell other countries that they have to stay friends with Taiwan and maintain a diplomatic relationship, but the U.S. itself doesn't have that diplomatic relationship, so we're preaching there. And so we, the United States, have diplomatic relations with every country in the world except Syria, North Korea, Iran, Cuba, until recently, and Taiwan. And Taiwan, of course, doesn't belong in that little group of nations. And so over the past 15 years, several House members, most recently Tom Tiffany from Wisconsin, introduced legislation calling for diplomatic relations. Is that something that's possible? Or as my scholar friends say, that is only possible if there's a complete meltdown in U.S.-China relations where the United States will say, doesn't matter anymore, let's just do it. Yeah, how do you see that, Randy?
Just if I were handicapping it, I think it's probably unlikely, but I think it's useful to have people voicing that opinion and keeping pressure on, because I think the alternative is moving, again, in the direction of something to the untrained eye will look an awful lot like a diplomatic relationship. It is an awkward position to say, do as we say, not as we did. But we're doing that. I know that Vice President Pence got on the phone and called the president of the Solomon Islands before they made their change, and they decided to do it anyways. And speaking of buyer's remorse, I think there's a lot of disappointment in the Solomons about the decision that they made. So I have no problem with people continuing to push for this because I think it's important to give voice to that. I was going to say one other thing, but maybe it'll come back to me. But why don't you go on?
But just to keep pressuring and keep pushing and keep it alive, right? And then at some point, who knows? But
Yeah.
Last time somebody asked Congressman Shabbat, say, when will there be diplomatic relations? I don't think we want to go there and speculate, but that's, depends. That's the answer. Which should be the answer. Next question. Yeah, TECRO name change. Let me be very quick about that. You know what it is all about, right? We want to change it to Taiwan Representative Office. We have legislation. It seems there is some momentum in the State Department and the National Security Council. Kurt Campbell supposedly is on board. Is there anything else we can do to push this forward to make it happen sooner rather than later? I'm optimistic myself.
I don't know the answer to that specifically, but I certainly support it, and I think we should always be deferential to our friends in Taiwan as to how they want to be described and characterized, and I have no problem with doing this quickly.
Yeah, and I think Lithuanian office was just opened yesterday and called the Taiwanese Representative Office, and so we're still campaigning to, from whichever angle we can think of to get called Taiwan Representative Office, and because that can be used all over the world, Lithuania, Holland, Germany, everywhere. This is something which we kind of, Eric Lee, our former intern, is a staff member at Randy's office, and about bolstering defense, U.S.-Taiwan defense relationship. Jiun, question 13. And so we believe that in general the U.S. should bolster its defense cooperation, high-level visits, military exchanges, and first, Washington should approach, that's with the strategic clarity, of course, we talked about that already. Second, although U.S. policy dictates that U.S. sells arms to Taiwan merely of a defensive character, time is now for the U.S. to sell all arms to Taiwan, whatever the country needs. Third, the U.S. should consider establishing a war reserve stockpile, and that's what Eric's article was with the general, right? General Lee is his name?
Admiral Lee, yep.
Yeah, Admiral Lee. Establishing a war reserve stockpile for and in Taiwan. In the event of a Chinese invasion, physical distance means that any U.S. military assistance would and could be late. So stockpile program for Taiwan would ameliorate this problem by pre-positioning U.S. military equipment in Taiwan for readily available use by the U.S. and or Taiwanese forces. And finally, the U.S. should invite Taiwan to participate in the RIMPAC, Rim of the Pacific exercises. What do you think about that, Randy? I think I know your answer, but
well, I largely support all of that. I mean, I'm the one who worked really hard to get the Chinese out of RIMPAC, the PLA out of RIMPAC.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow! I didn't know that.
One of
it was last year? No, 2 years ago, right?
2019.
Oh, 2019. Yeah, right.
It was one of 3 or 4 things I wanted to do when I came into office, and it was harder than it should have been, but we got it done. So I don't have a problem with any of that. I do want to make a point on the weapons of a defensive character. I can tell you the Taiwan Relations Act was written by non-military people because weapons are not inherently offensive or defensive. It's how they're used, how they're employed, how they're conceived of in terms of your doctrine and strategy. And arguably, virtually anything Taiwan would have would be defensive in nature because Taiwan has no ambitions to take the mainland. And so maybe anything short of nuclear weapons would be weapons of a defensive character in my book. So it's not a very good metric. It's not a very useful descriptive term. And I can tell you, 3 tours in government, twice at DoD, 1 at State Department. I never for a moment stopped to think, does this have a defensive character or not?
All right, good point. Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, thank you. Helpful. 2 more quick questions. Is that okay, Randy?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Let's open a beer. a referendum to decide Taiwan's future. So over the past 30 years, Taiwan has gradually moved towards full independence. And Chen Shui-bian said 20 years ago, the future of Taiwan can only be decided by the people of Taiwan. He then urged Taiwan's legislature to pass referendum legislation. We would like to ask you if by some democratic mechanism, such as referendum, the people of Taiwan decide to opt for formal de jure independence. Is there anything else the US can do than accept and recognize that democratically constituted wish of the people of Taiwan? I think we would welcome a referenda in pretty much every country around the world. We should support it in Taiwan too. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the people of Taiwan should determine Taiwan's future. I think there's a objective reality we all would have to deal with, which is it's unlikely that could be done anytime soon, cost free. And so friends in Taiwan would have to understand that there could be very severe consequences from their neighbors across the strait, and the U.S. would have to have some appreciation for that as well. But I think Taiwan should have the ability to decide its future for itself.
Self-determination, yeah. This question, 15, I think we can skip that. Maybe you can show it, Chi-Yoon, but it's about Senate confirmation of the AIT director. That's something we really care about, and there's some legislation. Do you have any thoughts about that, or
I'm not opposed to that. The reality is, at least my experience at State Department, there is a process of consulting with the Senate and not going through the formal process, not having a hearing and a committee vote and a floor vote, but a consultative process. I'd have no objection if it was
even more formal.
More formal, yeah.
And this, I'm not sure if you know this, Randy. I just want to give this to you. Can you put it in, Chi-Yoon? So the AIT is the only one of 3 U.S. government-funded non-government entities whose directors are not subject to Senate confirmation. The chiefs of the other 2, the Millennium Challenge Corporation and the National Endowment for Democracy, both must have Senate advice and consent. I found that out, about half a year ago or something. Yeah. And so it's the AIT is not the only one. So the only one who's still lacking is a little bit behind is the AIT.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Which I thought was interesting, yeah. Okay, the next one we can skip because we talked about that. Can you show it? It's US Taiwan FTA. US Taiwan, we always say that it's not only critical for Taiwan's economic survival, but maybe even for Taiwan's survival as a country, because the United States, Taiwan needs the very close relationship with US as an ally. But we got one question here in the chat box from Nick Wu in Orange County. So we already kind of touched upon it, and I was surprised that nobody else mentioned it. But President Biden told reporters 2 days ago in a gaggle at the airport, press gaggle, about Taiwan, say it's independent, it makes its own decisions. It's up to them to decide. They have to decide. Oh, you have it here. Okay. They have to decide. You follow that, Randy, yes?
Yep.
And it appears to me that the administration's message to China could not be more clear than that. And so, yeah, maybe, what do you think about that?
Well,
and then I'm not sure about what do you think about the administration's Taiwan policy. I think we already covered that strategic ambiguity. But so what's the impact? What does it mean? This what Biden said there. I was shocked when I saw it on CNN. And
we have a bit of a pattern where President Biden says things that are off the normal script, and then he gets walked back by the spokesperson at the podium, or gets walked back in some other form. But it keeps happening. So one has to believe this is reflecting his real views, his real opinions. Obviously, somebody who's been vice president for 8 years, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has come across these issues many times in the past. So he's probably given these issues some thoughts, and he probably accidentally speaks the truth sometimes. And
Right.
I think it probably this is how he feels, and that's not a bad thing. Now for the Chinese, I'm sure it's confusing as hell that he'll say something and then the White House spokesman will walk it back, and I think the overall trend is more support for Taiwan, and that's good.
Did the Chinese react? I haven't seen that,
I
right?
haven't seen
To
on this
this.
one.
No, right. But yeah,
Foreign ministry has been hiding since they kidnapped the tennis star Peng Shuai,
oh
and
yeah. Right.
they're they don't want to answer any questions.
Yes.
So
Right. But yeah, I think you're absolutely here spot on. Where it's not policy, it's not U.S. policy, but it seems to be in Biden's mind that's his mindset. So that in itself is encouraging, I think, for us Taiwanese Americans. So I think that was fantastic, Randy. Thank you so much. And we I think all learned a lot. And again, thanks for your generosity in sharing your opinions with us,
my pleasure.
simple, humble Taiwanese Americans. And I see a lot of thumbs up and applause. And so I'd like to thank Randy. I'm not sure if Annie's still here. Maybe she wants to officially thank Randy. Otherwise, I think we will just go ahead and end this great session, Randy. And hopefully
Great.
we can do this again sometime.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Say
you.
hello. Say hello to everybody, Randy.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Randy.
Hey, Pearl.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Fapa.
Yeah.